the nuclear gun, and thereby to intensify the Soviet diplomacy of blackmail.
In October of 1962, two global superpowers, America and Russia, came to the closest moment of nuclear fallout. Not knowing which one would make the first move, they both just waited to see what the other was going to do. John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev had their fingers on the big red button, ready at any time to push it and send their massive nuclear bombs. The Cuban Missile Crisis takes place in the middle of the Cold War. The Cold War was a race of arms, seeing which global superpower could produce the most nuclear weapons.
Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz was a Cuban communist who dictated Cuba. While America and the Soviet Union were on the brink of war, Castro urged the Soviets to attack first. He was looking for a way to defend his nation from an attack by the U.S. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, he was sure that a second attack would inevitably happen. The nuclear missiles were a good way to defend his country, while John F. Kennedy feared for his country.
Nikita Khrushchev was a statesman who led the Soviet Union in the Cold War. Khrushchev sent missiles to Cuba for many different reasons. 1. Cuba is only 90 miles from the U.S. coastline. Long to medium-range missiles could penetrate deep inside U.S. territories. Cuba was also an ally of the Soviet Union. That is probably another reason to send nuclear missiles to Fidel Castro.
John F. Kennedy was an American statesman who served as the 35th President of the United States. He tried to negotiate with Nikita Khrushchev. Failing could bring a nuclear war and the ending of the United States of America. For 13 days, they negotiated and tried to reach a compromise as the world held its breath. They finally reached a compromise. The U.S. wouldn't invade Cuba and would get rid of their missiles in Turkey. Then the Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba.
We have interviewed my grandmother, who was in Cuba during the time of the missile crisis. Her words are, "The period from October 16th through October 28th, 1962 is known in Cuba as the Crisis de Octubre, or in English, the October Crisis. At the time, the Castro regime had very tight control of the media in Cuba, so the people were not really aware of what was going on at the time. The Cuban people believed, as informed by the regime, that the United States was getting ready to attack Cuba, and they were fearful of what could happen. It was only after everything was settled that some of the Cuban people little by little learned from their friends and relatives living overseas as exiles what had really happened. Those who did not have contacts in other countries never really understood what took place. The Russian army had a big presence in Cuba, so it was no surprise to many that Nikita Khrushchev was relocating missiles to Cuba. Russia was determined to keep the island as a communist stronghold from where to export the Marxist doctrine into Latin America. History proved this theory to be true with the expansion of the doctrine into Nicaragua, Bolivia, and Venezuela, and increased anti-U.S. sentiments in most of Latin America.
After the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet Union appeared to have retreated from the crisis before anything bad could have happened. Neither party was happy with the results of the compromise. The United States looked like it was weak when the government decided not to invade Cuba. The Cuban people felt betrayed by Russia and Castro because they did not know what was going on, and only President Kennedy and Khrushchev was involved in making decisions. This compromise also created the hotline between Washington, D.C. and the Soviet Union. That was to be used as a way to communicate in case of another crisis.